Flat Earth, the internet community that just does not want to die, even after 2,000 years of people knowing that the Earth is not flat. These people seem to have a virtue for being willfully ignorant. But how much do they know about photography and cameras in general? Well, let's have a look. This is a hangout between two flat earthers, Mike Helmick and Anthony Riley. They are looking through some photographs taken during the 2017 American eclipse, but they're going to start off with something a little bit more simple. Apparently going through some camera stuff and a little presentation. These are the only two things that I'll be covering in this video, and the rest of the hangout will be covered at a later date. At this time we are less than 2 minutes into the hangout itself, and the eagle-eyed viewers will have spotted kind of a problem with what Mr. Riley has standing behind him. To those of you that don't actually know what is behind him, this is a Nikon D500 with an attached battery grip on the bottom, usually used for more battery life to have an extra battery in, and also for vertical shooting if you're shooting portraits. Attached to it is a Nikon 70-200 f2.8 VR2 lens. Some of you might still ask, well, what's the problem? It's just a camera and a lens. Well, the problem comes when you actually see the weight of these things. As you can see on the image I'm showing, the 70-200 lens weighs approximately 1,500 grams. That's 1.5 kilograms. And this next picture shows the approximate weight of the camera, that is without the battery grip. That is 860 grams, which is basically half of what the lens weighs. Now, if we take a look at the backside of the lens that Riley has mounted, there's a little thing sticking out. This is called a tripod mount. This is used to mount the tripod to, instead of mounting it to the camera, because guess what? The lens mount, where you attach your lens to your camera, doesn't really like having heavy things hanging from it. So you attach your tripod to the tripod mount, and then you don't end up warping your lens mount, and actually that will actually end up destroying your camera. And Riley, I don't think Nikon warranty will actually cover your stupidity just because you don't know how to look after your equipment. So if you do that, you'll have to buy a whole new camera. Just a little hint. Now Riley wants to teach us what is wrong with JPEG. Starts off with that it isn't verified evidence, it is only verifiable, which is kind of a word salad and kind of an oxymoron. The second point is that the camera itself can change the image depending on its settings. Usually this is fine, but still processing an image. Not exactly. You can also have this done with raw images. If you change your ISO, if you put it up, you introduce more noise to the picture. If you make the aperture wider, you have a less depth of field, and then you have more that's not in focus. Processing, we'll get to that in a little bit. The third thing is the format is compressed significantly. This works against the obtaining earthshine. Not necessarily. It depends on how you're exposing your image, how you're composing it. Compression, I'll also return to that because it could become a little bit interesting. Lastly, it does not satisfy claims of being raw. Well, it depends on what you actually mean by raw, which we'll see in a second. Because, yes, there has been some stuff done to the JPEG. It's seeing what you have set it to see. Your camera sensor basically hates you. You have to tell it exactly what you want unless you're using an automatic mode. Then it will choose it for you, and it doesn't always work out. Especially if you have your white balance set the wrong way. But that is actually not that necessary to talk about in this. Let's go on to the raw. This part will take a little bit longer to go through because there's quite a few assertions that are just blatantly false and wrong. And honestly, it's pretty embarrassing to see how many mistakes there are here. He's just writing down assertion after assertion, and he hasn't actually done his homework. So He just looks like an idiot when he is talking here and writing all this down. Funny enough, he starts off with something true, that RAW is directed off the camera sensor, which is true. The RAW, quote-unquote, image, which isn't actually an image, it is a digital negative. It's a data stream of image data that hasn't been made into a picture yet. This you need software to do. Next up, no processing has taken place, which is false, because there's an imaging processor on the camera that all images go through, so they get processed and actually get from the sensor to the SD card. We also need to just have a quick look at what a RAW file actually contains, and they're basically all based on the TIFF data format, with some exceptions. Now, I've highlighted two here that are pretty significant. That is that it also contains an image thumbnail and a full-size JPEG conversion that is used to preview the file. This is on the camera LCD screen, and also if you're using Windows 8 or 10, you can get a little preview of it that it opens up in the image viewer or image, whatever you want to call it, of the operating system. These images are JPEGs. They have been processed. This means that the RAW file itself has been processed. Next up, no compression has taken place. Well, let's go to Nikon's website again and look at the D500 specs. Storage file formats: 12 or 14-bit RAW, lossless, compressed, or uncompressed. That means you actually have to set your little selection screen on the camera to do uncompressed. And even some professional cameras don't do uncompressed. And more cameras like the D7000 range, the D3000, 5000, the D700, etc., they don't do uncompressed RAW files. This means that it is compressed. So it is just generally false. And wherever you have some compression taking place, you have the risk of compression artifacts. Usually you don't see those when you're using a good RAW converter program, because they'll just introduce more noise, but the more you do to the picture, you actually will get some compression artifacts at some point. The last one in this point is that it is verified evidence and with camera credible. This is the best evidence. I actually don't know what he means by that. Well, who knows? It's writing. Finally, point number 2. RAW cannot be edited without changing into some other format. I think you need to contact Nikon there, Riley, because they don't seem to be agreeing with you. Because they say, after processing, the NEF file can be saved as TIFF, JPEG, or again as NEF. With the addition of any applied capture NX2 processing saved inside the file, as a second or alternate instruction set. So, what does this mean? Well, that means that if you open an image with Nikon's own software, Capture NX2, you can save it, you can process it, edit it, and save it again as a new RAW file. Now, on the bottom it does say, as long as the original NEF file is preserved, the digital negative remains untouched. Processing an NEF file does not alter the original instruction set. But if you send your new edited RAW file to somebody, then their software cannot detect any original image, which means they actually just have a new NEF RAW file. Canon has their own program for this, Digital Photo Professional, something like that, DPP for short. And according to sources on the interwebs, you can actually also save in their file format on their software, the .cr2 file format. The second this conversion is done, that verified evidence becomes verifiable and needs caution applying to it. Well, going by the first premise that you have to change it into another format, like a JPEG, TIFF, whatever, then it's actually pretty logical that you can see that you're getting a JPEG or TIFF file and not a NEF CR2 8RW whatever file. so kinda not that needed to say that, but okay. And the last point, finally. These file sizes are huge, and the images are often, I think he means are often, flat-looking, ideal for processing. Depending on how you define huge, yes, my 24 megapixel D7100 in lossless compressed, they take up about 17-20 megabytes. On my Sony a6000, they take up 24 megabytes, and both of the sensors are 24 megapixels. What he means by flat looking, I'm actually not sure. Usually when photographers talk about an image being flat looking, they're talking about the color profile. It's flat and you just need to grade it a little bit. You can also do this on certain 4K video cameras. Ideal for post-processing? Yeah, you kinda need that if you want to upload it anywhere or print it. Because if you just print a raw file, it'll look dull and boring. And places like Facebook and Instagram, you can't upload your raw files to those. You can to Flickr, but there's not really any point unless you're testing something. So yeah, final point is also true. I'm surprised. Well, I actually didn't want to just leave it at that with this part, because the Hangout is a little bit old, so I actually wrote a private message to Riley about a week ago to ask him if he was still under this impression. I'm not going to read all of the messages, it will take too long, but I'll just read the first one and then a couple of the replies. So, sorry to bother you again, but I would really like to know something. If raw files are uncompressed, as you have stated many times, why is it then that on a camera like the D500, you actually have to choose if you want it saved in uncompressed RAW? Cameras like the D7000, blah blah blah, cannot shoot in uncompressed RAW. And you have to select it. Okay. Let's see what he replied. And I hate YouTube systems, so we have to scroll all the way down here. And I'll do it slowly so people can read it afterwards. Okay. His first response. I think the word I used is unprocessed, not uncompressed. If I said uncompressed, I meant unprocessed. Well, first of all, like I said here, it's just an excuse. It just seems like a very, very bad excuse. Because he wrote it down in this Hangout. So, what does he mean? Because in other Hangouts he's been in, he's also reiterated it, said many, many, many times that it's uncompressed. So, let's see. You don't make changes to the raw file, you have to convert it to open it, but the raw file is unchanged. That depends on what program you use, actually. If you use Adobe Lightroom, there's 0 conversion done. I think I was talking about the Windows 10 editor. Yeah, I was talking about the Windows 10 editor right here, about editing them. Then you actually don't edit, when you open it in Windows 10, you actually edit the thumbnail. You don't actually edit the raw file. But what he's talking about here, that you have to convert it to open it, that's not true. When you open it in Photoshop, on the other hand, some other things happen that will be explained later in this video. Anyway, let's continue. The Hangout was on at 3 AM. He's just trying to save his face again and say that he means uncompressed and unprocessed. But as we've gone through, they are processed, so sorry. Actually, let's see. A few more replies. And another response. Let's see what this one is. Raw files on a camera are unprocessed and uncompressed in the context of JPEG compression. He did talk about JPEG compression artifacts. Yes and no. It depends on how much you zoom in and how much you do to it. But they are indeed compressed and they are indeed processed. When the raw file comes off the camera and onto the machine, at this point they are still unprocessed and uncompressed. Yes, that's true. However, the moment you open the raw file, this process of opening it now means that it is processed. No, no, no. the way Lightroom actually works is that it does not touch any of the actual raw files. It just opens them up and gives you a preview of what it will look like, a very, very high resolution preview of it. So you can just do whatever you want and not actually do any so-called destructive work to it. Let's see here. In doing this, the file you save is no longer raw, although capable of being verified as genuine. Like I just showed, if you have Capture NX2, it is a raw file. The raw file remains intact and untouched. There are now 2 files. Wrong. In Lightroom, no. Lightroom has its own little library. It has a separate file that tells the program what you've done to the file, so you can open them and so forth. It also communicates a little bit with Photoshop. The difference is that when you are doing it on Photoshop and you open the image, you get the Adobe Camera Raw prompt first. This is actually the only place Photoshop works with the raw image data. It then creates a new file in the same folder with the information to Photoshop about what you've done change-wise to it. But once you press Open Image, you're actually no longer working with the raw file. And again, I will show this later in the video because it's very important to what they're doing to the image. And it's also actually pretty funny that he's mentioning these things, because he is more or less admitting that when they're editing these raw files in his Hangout, they might as well have just gotten a JPEG, because it doesn't really matter if it's JPEG or whatever, because they're still going to work with some compression. Anyway, if you present me the CR2 or NEF file unless you faked it, then the file remains intact. Okay, I don't know how you're going to tell that, but whatever. However, if you present the JPEG and claim it is unedited, we can check it. Ultimately, if you are able to edit NEF or CR2, then you prove you are a fraud. Okay, so just the fact that you say that somebody can do it, then they're automatically a fraud. This we can also check. Okay. And what qualifications do you actually have to check these things? I mean, already in this video, you've seen that he has no concept of what he's talking about. And I don't think the FBI uses untrained people to, check if a photo is actually genuine or if it's been doctored. You do need, a little bit, actually. You do need to be an expert on it. You need to be an expert on everything regarding to what you're doing, because you need to be able to explain in detail what you're doing to the image and why you're doing it. And I told him where he's going wrong there. And I actually sent him 2 messages, and he hasn't responded since, because let's see what I write here. I did send him the link earlier to the Nikon page, where they specifically say that you can save it as a raw file. I'm just checking if it's edited. Well, the way he's done it so far, in this Hangout, they use Photoshop. In another Hangout with Sean and Red, he used the Windows 10 picture editor. Why the hell is he using that? I mean, it does not make any sense that he's using that, because you might as well just be using a JPEG. And the last thing here was what I just said before. I mean, if any does he really think that anybody can just tell if a picture has been doctored? I mean, there are forgeries out there that are so well made that you really need to be an expert in this. And well, if we are part of the conspiracy, why wouldn't we have access to those? And why does he think that with Photoshop, he and some of his friends can just do this, we mess around with a few sliders in Photoshop, see, it's fake, because I don't know what I'm doing. As I said earlier, the rest of the Hangout will have to wait until another date, because this has been dragging out for quite some time now. So stay tuned for next time, where we see Riley and Helmick try to do photo forensics. Should be interesting.